Good HaKodesh, everyone.
Likewise.
So today we are beginning a new Siman in Iggeres HaKodesh. We're beginning Siman Daled on page Kufhei, which is opposite of page 208.
Amen.
As we've mentioned on several occasions, most of the letters in the Iggeres HaKodesh are about tzedakah. So the last letter that we learned, Siman Gimel, was about tzedakah, and we spoke about one quality of tzedakah. And in this letter, we're going to talk about another quality of tzedakah. You know, when a person who's a darshan, or a person is a thinker, so usually they develop a certain approach or a certain spin or a certain angle regarding a topic, and that's what they always speak when they talk about that topic. That they always return to that single approach to it. Maybe they build on that approach and expanded upon that approach. But the Alter Rebbe, we know how great of a tzaddik the Alter Rebbe was, but in tzaddikim I can't say I'm a maven. But in terms of the largeness of his mind, that we have many different letters about tzedakah. As we've mentioned, every year the Alter Rebbe would write a different letter to the Chassidim to fundraise, and every single year it was a totally different approach, a novel angle about tzedakah, which shows how a single mind can approach a single topic from so many different directions. So the last letter that we learned, which we just finished last week, there the Nekuda was the idea of Vayilbash Tzedakah Kesirya, and the idea of how explaining why of all the mitzvahs Nafka Tzedakah is that we have Peireseha, we eat the Peiris, the dividends we have over here in this world. And the reason why, as the Alter Rebbe explains, is because of the Nekafim, because of the holes in the Levush, which allow some of the oir of the mitzvah to come down here all the way into this world. That was last week. That was last Perek. And now the Alter Rebbe, in this Perek, the Alter Rebbe is going to begin with the words Ein Yisrael Negalan Ela B'Tzdaka. This is a direct quote from the Rambam in Hilchos Matnas Aniyim. It's loosely based on a Gemara, where the Rambam writes Ein Yisrael Negalan Ela B'Tzdaka. The Geula will come for Klal Yisrael only B'Zchut Tzedakah. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, V'shaveha B'Tzdaka. Famous pasuk, Tzion B'Mishpat Tipada. The Tzion will be redeemed because of Mishpat, but V'shaveha, those who the captives, Klal Yisrael, who are captives in other nations, they will return B'Zchus of B'Tzdaka. So the Kibbutz Gali is the idea that all Klal Yisrael will return to Tzion will be through Tzedakah. So we have to understand what is the connection between tzedakah and geula. Now, I assume that most people aren't very bothered by this question. Sasson, this question bothers you?
Yeah.
It bothers you. Why tzedakah? Of all the mitzvahs, why tzedakah brings Mashiach?
It said also if Bnei Israel will keep 2 Shabbatot.
Okay, that's for another day, another time. But here we're talking about tzedakah. Most people, they say, tzedakah, you're helping other people. Tzedakah isn't easy. It's a hard mitzvah to do. Tzedakah is a big mitzvah. So therefore, we're zeichet to the geula. But as we've spoken many times, we know that from the perspective of Chassidus, which is based on the way the Shalav views the idea of schar and einesh, is that the rewards aren't, the rewards in the Torah, it's not that Hashem looks at you and says, you did such a good thing, what can I do for you? I'll do this. But rather, there is a pneumistic connection between that which you did and the reward that you receive. In the Lashon of Chazal, b'midah shadam moeded in lay, right? There's this idea of there's this intrinsic connection between the act and the reward, and the reward in a way is seen as the consequence of the behavior, as opposed to just a simple reward. So it's not, we can't say, Hashem looks and says, that's a big mitzvah. Wow, you gave so much money to tzedakah. That must have been so hard. I'm going to bring the gula for that. No, we need to look and find what is the deeper connection between tzedakah and geula. And then, just a little of a sneak peek ahead. The Alter Rebbe is going to tell us that we also, every single one of us, we want to experience geula on a personal level. There's the idea of geula klalis, The general geula, then there's the geula pratis, which is the particular geula, and every single one of us wants to experience that geula pratis. And when is that geula pratis? When do we experience that geula pratis? That's every single day during davening. During davening is when we have the pada b'shalom nafshi, the neshama experiences a geula during davening. So just like we have this idea of Ein Yisrael Nagal Nala B'Tzedakah, that Klal Yisrael will only be redeemed through tzedakah. The same thing is also, we want to experience our personal geula, that also comes through tzedakah. Which is why this idea of giving tzedakah dafka before davening. The Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer Yohiv Ani and Pruta La Ani V'Hadar Matzli. Rabbi Eliezer would give a pruta to a poor person, and then he would daven. Sheinamar, as the pasuk says, Ani b'tzedek echze panacha. That with b'tzedek, with tzedakah, I will be able to envision your face. There's on Hayom Yom, the Rebbe writes how the Rebbe Rashab, very often before davening in the morning, he'd be searching around to find a poor person to feed. The little shtetl on the Bavitch, and that's what he would do. So there's this idea of giving tzedakah before davening, or why is that? So if we correlate davening with geula, which obviously we're going to have to understand why davening is geula, we have to have a better understanding of what geula is and what davening is, and then we'll understand that just like tzedakah brings about the geula klal, tzedakah also allows us to experience the geula pratis during davening. And the Alter Rebbe was addressing his body of Hasidim, who he knew that probably the best incentive that they can have to give tzedakah is the promise that it would enhance their davening, it would help them experience davening in a greater way. These are holy people, and they didn't have a lot of money. You know, I've mentioned to you in the past that these are all letters, but not all the letters are printed in their entirety in Tanya over here. Because when the sons of the Alter Rebbe, when they selected the letters and printed them in Iggeres HaKodesh, so sometimes they cut out the beginning, sometimes they cut out the end. In other words, they put in what they thought was, what you'd say, nitzrach l'doros, right, which was relevant for the generations to be printed, not the private messages that were included. When I say private, I don't mean necessarily to a private individual, even it could have been to community, but the messages that were more timely at that time. So this letter is one of those letters. This letter is actually, it cuts off in middle, and the end of the letter, the Alter Rebbe urges his Chassidim to give tzedakah, and he urges his Chassidim because he knew that they didn't have a lot of money at all, and some of them didn't have money to give tzedakah. He urged the Chassidim to lend money to their fellows so that the others should be able to give tzedakah. You know, we're not used to this idea of going into debt for tzedakah.
Rabbi Stockholm used to go around 770 and give everybody coins
to give tzedakah.
Because people don't
Rabbi's dollars is also the same.
because people don't carry change always. So.
No, the Rabbi's dollars is the same English.
Right?
Rabbi's dollars is
We'll talk about that probably next week.
Rabbi, I have a problem why the Alter Rebbe start En Yisrael Nigalim. When it's an En, it means nothing else beside that. But it's a lot of things that...
This is a direct quote from the Rambam. This is not the Alter Rebbe's words. Ein Yisrael Nigalim Ela B'Tzedakah is a direct quote from the Rambam. And Hilchos Matnas Aniyim. Yeah.
What's an example of gula pratis? Someone's private service?
No. A spiritual gula pratis, which we have to, as
Doesn't mean he has his own service and he's going to be redeemed from his own...
No, we're not talking about that. We're talking a spiritual gula, which we have to...
What is that supposed to mean?
We will find out.
Patient, my friend.
So we're not used to going into debt for giving tzedakah. If I have money, I'll give it. I don't have money, I'm not going to borrow money. Now, we do live in a consumer society where everyone's in debt, pretty much. And that's due to Baruch Hashem credit cards. But we don't put down $5,000 on our credit card. You know, if I need a couch, I'll put down money. If I need this, the Alter Rebbe wanted the Chassidim to view tzedakah as a need as much as the other essential needs that they have for which they borrowed money, and to give tzedakah. So the Alter Rebbe was dealing with Chassidim who did not have a lot of money. He was trying to incentivize them to give tzedakah. And this letter, where the Alter Rebbe promises and says, I'm telling you, tzedakah brings about geula, brings about geula for Klal Yisrael, but also it will bring about a geula pratis for yourself. This was meant to urge the Chassidim and to encourage them to give more tzedakah. Let's do one side.
Yeah.
Ksiv, the pasuk says, pasuk in Tehillim says, tzedek lefanav yahalech. What does tzedek lefanav yahalech mean? Righteousness goes before him. But Baruch Hashem, we have an Israeli over here. And he can probably tell me the word Yehalach is awkward, right? What should it say?
Yelech.
Yahaloch.
Yelech,
Yelech.
right? Tzedek lefanav Yelech. What does Yehalach mean?
Like Lashon
But
Hara.
somebody is walking.
Leading, right?
Leading.
Right.
Oh.
Tzedek, Yehalach means to lead something, right? So it said, what does it mean? The pasuk should have said Yelech. What is the meaning of Tzedek lefanav Yehalach? That Tzedek, tzedakah before him leads.
It could also mean when the person's nifter. I think this is
That's what it says.
The person's
Tzedek
nifter, so the mice and toivim.
But even so, it should say Tzedek lefanav Yelech. His tzedakah goes before him.
Goes before him.
Yeah, but what does it mean Yehalach? What does it mean Yehalach? So, as is the way in Chassidus very often, we start off with some questions and then we go off in a different direction entirely. And by the time we finish this letter, which is somewhat of a lengthy letter, we'll come back and we'll answer what does it mean based on everything that we will learn. We'll understand why it says Tzedek Lefanav Yehalech. Achin, what the idea is, Al Pi Mashakasu, based on what the pasuk says, L'cha Amar Libi Bakshu Panai. It's a pasuk that we're all familiar with from Tehillim. We say in L'David Hashem Eiri. L'cha Amar Libi Bakshu Panai. What does that mean? So there, if you look at the Mefarshim, there are actually different ways to understand this pasuk. But the way the Alter Rebbe is understanding it, it means L'cha Amar Libi. My heart tells you, Bakshu Panai. I want you to seek out my pnimius. I want you to seek out my inner part. And why is that? Because the Alter Rebbe will explain that within the heart there are two parts. There's the pnimius of the heart, there's the chitzonius of the heart, and the heart begs and says, please, I want you to seek out my pnimius. Don't settle for my chitzonius. Don't settle for my external dimension. I want you to seek out my pnimius. Kihine, and now the Alter Rebbe will explain this. Wait a second, Pirush, that means Bakshu Pnimius Alev, we have to seek out the Pnimius of the heart. Bakshu Panai, the heart says, Bakshu Panai, seek out my Pnimius. Kihine, because Belahav Yisoido Esho Likis Shebelev. In the fire of the element, the blazing element of fire, which is the Nefesh, which is in the godly fire, which is in the heart. In other words, the Avas Hashem that's in the heart, Yesh Beis Bechines, there are two levels. There are two levels of fire in the heart. Bechines Chitzonius or Bechines Pnimius. There's an external type of fire, external type of love, and a Pnimiustic of love. Chitzonius Halev, the external part of the heart, Hislavus Hamislaheves, is the Hislavus, the excitement, the passion, the fire, which burns, but where does it come from? Bebechinas habina v'hadas begdulas Hashem ein soif baruch. That comes from a person contemplating and deeply, mentally connecting to the greatness of Hashem. And this is accomplished by Liz Beinin begdulasai, contemplating Hashem's greatness. And to awaken from this contemplation, from this understanding, a fiery love for Hashem. The chitzonius halev, the external type of love that we have from Hashem, is a product of our understanding. It's a product of our awareness. It is a product of our experience. It is something which is created. We know that one of the basics of Chabad, it is so basic that actually this is part of the name. One of the basics of Chabad is the idea of Chachma Bin Adas, which is that our mind and our thoughts influence our feelings, our emotions, and through them our behaviors. This is something which is true in all areas of life, that our feelings are impacted by our thoughts. Imagine you have two people. Both of them were slighted by someone else. They were the victim of someone harassing them or doing something which is disrespectful to them. One of them is very upset about it 10 days later, one of them isn't upset about it. What is the difference between person A and person B? Person A, in their mind, they keep on replaying what happened. It's on a loop. And person B pushed that out of their mind, whether consciously, whether willingly, or just happened by itself, but that's what the more we think about something, automatically the more it impacts our behaviors. The more we think about the Gedulas Hashem, the more we think about Hashem's greatness, the more we think about Hashem's kindness to us. And everyone has, Chaste Hashem, that Hashem does with us. And the more we think about who we are and who Hashem is, the greater the love that we have for Hashem. Upnimiyas halev, but what is pnimiyas halev? Hi hanekuda shebepnimiyas halev. It is the very center of the heart, the innermost point of the heart, the liba, the depths of the heart, shehi lemayla mayla bebechinas hadas v'atfuna, which is way beyond the idea of the understandings and the thoughts, sheyuchala adam lisboinen believe b'gedulas Hashem, that which a person contemplates in their heart, the greatness of Hashem. Ukamei and as the pasuk says, "Mimamakim karasicha Hashem," that from the depths I call out to you, Hashem. Me'umkad liba, from the depths of the heart. Interesting, this is a pasuk which we say during Aseret Yemei Tshuva, and I think we've spoken about this in the past. How without being exposed to Chassidus, most people they say Shir, they say the capital and they say Shir Hamales Mimamakim, from the depths I call out to you, Hashem. What depths are we talking about? What's the depths? So you think, I'm in such a lowly place, I'm in a dungeon, from this lowly place, I call out to you, Hashem. And Chassidus says, Mimamakim is from the deepest part of the heart, the deepest and holiest part of the heart. That's where I'm calling out to you. Let's talk a little about this outside before we go back inside.
Mimamakim is like Begetzal Mavet, it's the same idea.
Not at all. That's what I'm saying. That according to Chassidus, Mimamakim is a reference to the deepest part of the heart, the depths. When it comes to love, there are two types of love. There are two types of feelings that we have. One of them is manufactured. And one of them is not manufactured at all, but it is an expression of who I am. It is an expression of the deepest part of who I am. It's not imposed upon me, not by my mind, and not by my environment, and not by my experiences, but it is an essential core part of my identity and who I am.
How did you acquire that?
How did you acquire yourself?
Not everybody. Some people don't have that passion.
So the Alter Rebbe is saying every single one of us, because we're a Yid and because we're Ben Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, therefore, by definition, every single one of us, we have be'umka deliba, in the depths of our heart, we have a love for Hashem, which is not a product of our understanding of Hashem. It's not a product of our contemplating His greatness and His kindness. It's not a product of our experience. It's not a product of our awareness. It is simply an expression of who we are. That is the Pnimiyas Halev. When we say Bakshu Panai, L'cha Amalibi Bakshu Panai, the Mamakim Karasicha Hashem, and by the way, it's no coincidence that both of these psukim, L'cha Amalibi and Mamakim, are both related to Aseret Yemei Tshuva. They're both related to HaKodesh, because really Tshuva is an attempt to get to that place, that deepest part of the heart. And that is what we are searching for. And actually, as we'll find out, that is the definition of Geula. If you can redeem, if you can get out in the open, that essential relationship and love you have for Hashem, that is the definition of Geula. And when that happens for Klal Yisrael, that is the Geula Klalis. When it happens for an individual, that is a Geula Pratis. To understand this better, the Alter Rebbe is going to give a mashal from the other direction. Falderech mashal, by way of example, just like this is true about the neshama, the nefesh alikis, that there are two kinds of loves that it has, the same thing is true in zelu umazeh, and the opposite side, the nefesh habamis, also you have these two ideas. And probably most of us will be able to relate to this better. Lefamim, sometimes, yesh inyan gadol ma'oid mi'oid, sometimes there is something which is very large. Shekol chayis ha'adam tali. The very life of the person is dependent on it. V'negeya ad nekudas pnimiyas halev ad bechlal, and therefore it is negeya, it touches, it impacts, it affects the very, very center, the point of the center of the heart, v'ad bechlal, including that. And I want to point out that we're not talking here, what we're saying here is very subjective. When we say something that a person's life depends upon, we don't mean that in a literal sense. But every single one of us has those things in our life which we need it, And if we didn't have it, we would go absolutely crazy, and we act in ways which are completely illogical and irrational, because this is something which is very, very important to me, not for any logical reason. Something of this sort, when it causes you to do things and to speak in ways which are completely illogical. When someone touches you in that way, in that area, and tries to deprive you of something, you'll act in a completely illogical way, and you'll do things to achieve that which you want, or to get that you want, that make no sense. It's not al pi cheshbon klal o klal, but because this is something which is negeya be'etzem. V'zelu mazeh, the opposite is true. Kacha hu mamish, the same thing is also about avodah shebelev and the avodah of the heart. I'll give you an example. The love that parents have for their children, is it a logical love?
No.
It's not logical. What do I mean it's not logical? I don't mean to say that it's illogical either. It's not illogical to love a child.
You can't explain it.
But to say that, and even if you could explain it, in other words, my kids are wonderful, give me such nachas. So they're everything up, I love them. But is that really it?
No.
Even if I could explain it, my love is not because of the logic. The logic is explaining a phenomenon that exists already. I love my kids because they're my kids. That's l'mayla metam v'das. It's an expression of my very self. Now that's a relatively benign, but there are many other such things. You can argue addiction is something along of that line. We're talking about the nefesh habahamis. Sometimes the nefesh habahamis will do crazy things, right? The definition of addiction is that it makes your life unmanageable because it makes you do crazy things. Why would you do crazy things? So again, if your desire for something is based on logic and makes sense, then then your emotion to it is only, your emotion towards it will be a logical one, so to say, and you'll only do logical things to get it. At the moment your logic says, stop, at this point already it stops making sense for you to pursue that which you want to pursue, that's when you stop. And then everything is about a cost-benefit analysis. I want this for this reason. Now the difference between these two types of love, the essential love, which is the pnimiyus halev, and contrived love, but contrived means it's something that's not essentially who I am. It's added on to me. It's imposed upon me. There's a double difference. There's a dual difference over here. Number one, in terms of quantity, and number two, in terms of quality. When I have a passion towards something, and it's illogical, in other words, there's a reason why I want it. So let's say I want a car. I want a fancy car. But why do I want the fancy car? It could be two reasons.
Show off.
Impress upon.
One reason could be a logical one. I want to impress for this and this reason. I want the luxuries in it. And whether or not the conclusion you arrive is correct, but the bottom line is I have a lot of good reasons, and because of those reasons, I want the car. What if it turns out that the car costs $1 million? Okay. So the reasons for not getting the car are stronger than the reasons to get the car. So I'm not going to get the car. Because how strong is my desire? Only as strong as the reasons. The moment the reasons aren't that strong, or the moment that there are other more compelling reasons the other way, so I won't get the car. But what if the reason why I want the car, and I think you can relate to it, some people, they want a fancy car, it's negeya than benefesh mamash. What? It's not because of a reason. It is a deep yearning and desire. They have a mishigas. They have a love. What? A taiva. They have a love, a connection.
The whole lot depends on it.
Yeah.
My father used to say, "Gegangen and leben." Gegangen and leben.
Yeah. It costs $1 million. That guy will find $1 million. And if he can't find $1 million, he's going to rob a bank.
That's it.
He might get arrested, but he's acting in ways illogical. Why? Because it's negeya. He can't live without the fancy car. His whole life. That's what I said before.
Dependent on it.
Right. So again, these are the two types of love, the two types of desire that a person can have. One is chitzonius alev. Chitzonius alev is a product of, again, your experience, your awareness, your understanding, your logic. That's chitzonius alev. Pnimius alev is l'mayla man hadas. It's not based on logic, and it is extremely deep, and therefore it is extremely powerful. So quantitatively, it's much. Pnimius alev is so much stronger than chitzonius alev, because there's this cause and effect going on over here. The effect is only as strong as the cause, as opposed to pnimius alev is unlimited strong. But it's not only about the quantity in terms of the quality. At the end of the day, chitzonius alev is not me. Pnimius alev is me. If I want the car because of all the reasons, the moment those reasons go away, then I don't need the car anymore. Because it's not essentially part of me. Pnimius alev doesn't go away because it's me. It's part of who I am. And just like we have that in terms of the nefesh habahamis, the same thing is also we have that by the nefesh halikis. That is chitzonius alev and this pnimius alev. Chitzonius alev is the love for Hashem, which is not an expression of who we are. It's an expression, it's a product of my contemplating Hashem's greatness. It's a product of my understanding. It's a product of my focus. It's a product of my awarenesses and realizations and my study of Torah. So how powerful is that love? It says, what?
It flies away in a few.
No. By the way, the point here isn't to put down that Ava, because if you remember, we said before, Chassidus Chabad actually is all about that Ava, but ultimately, it doesn't compare. And that's, and Beferish, it's a big avodah to be misbein in the B'dulas Hashem and to be B'meil and Ava, but at the same time, it doesn't compare to Pnimius alev. Bakshu Panei, it doesn't compare to Mamamakim, to the Pnimius alev, which is revealing the core of who I am, the core connection, and there, on that level, my Avat Hashem is an essential part of my identity, and therefore it is so powerful. We know when a Yid is Moshe Nefesh Al Kiddush Hashem, it's not a logical cheshbon. There's no logical cheshbon that makes you give up your life. What is it? It's the gili of the Pnimius alev, and mitzad the gili Pnimius alev, you act in ways which are completely irrational.
How do you normally access it? Besides, Messias.
You're always 2 steps ahead of me.
Yeah?
Yeah, you're always asking what it says on the next page.
I never looked at it.
No, I don't have it.
What?
Write it down.
You don't have to write it down. You could trust me that we're going to talk about it.
I like to get down to the matter.
No, because as soon as we say one thing, you're like, okay, you're telling me what it is. How do I get it? Yeah, we're getting there. We're not finished yet discussing the what it is, so we're not yet ready to move to the how. But we will move to the how. But any guesses on the how? You have any thoughts maybe on how to arrive there?
I can't even identify it. It's something to be. It's like intrinsic. It's like.
I think one thing we know by now already is.
What?
One thing we already should know by now is that one of the keys to this is tzedakah. V'shaveha b'tzedakah, right?
It's an instinct that's he trying to explain. Instinct.
How do you reveal that instinct? But we have a ways to go.
You have the instinct. Period.
Are you a yid?
Yeah.
Then you have it.
That's good to hear that.
Yeah. And this is the Alter Rebbe's definition of Geula. Think about it for a second. What is Geula? Geula is me being free to be myself.
Liberated.
Nothing imposed, right? Liberated. What is liberated from? Liberated from? Liberated from everything that's compelling me to act in a way which is not me. That's what Geula is, right? And by the way, even if I'm doing something that's a good thing, but it's not, but the real me is locked up, then that's not a Geula. What is Geula?
Liberation.
When the essential connection to Hashem, the Pnimius Halev, when that becomes revealed, that's Geula. And that's really what we're trying to do. The whole avoid of Chitzonius Halev is beautiful, it's wonderful. And Taka, it brings you to Avas Hashem. But you're still in Galus. The Pnimius Halev is still in Galus. How do we let out this passionate, powerful love for Hashem? That is what is going to be the topic of this Perek. And before we go further, I want to talk a little about the Hashgacha Pratis that we're here today. on Rosh Chodesh Shvat. We are 10 days away from HaSiri HaKodesh Yud Shvat, which is the yard site of the Rebbe Rayatz, Rabbi Yitzchak of Lubavitch, passed away in Yud Shvat. We spoke about this last week. And the day when the Rebbe accepted the leadership of Chassidus Chabad. And we spoke a little last week about the Maimer Basi Lagani. And we'll speak about it a little tonight. Probably speak about it also a little next week, Mir Hashem. And one of the big ideas in the Maimer Basi Lagani, I'm not going to repeat everything I said last week, but how it was given, but that was the Maimer the Friedrich Rebbe gave out on the day he passed away, in honor of the day he passed away. The Maimer there talks about that each and every single one of us is intended to be a Mishkan for Hashem. Doesn't say but every one of us. How do we become a Mishkan for Hashem? So we have a few parshas in the Torah, Truma, Tetzaveh, Vayakol, Pekudei. We see how the Mishkan was constructed. And we have to figure out every single one of those components. What is that in me? Those are, although there it's talking about physical things, physical items, and the same thing is also, by the way, afterwards we have to examine the avoid on the Beis HaMikdash and figure out what's that avoid on me. Every single one of the things that we learn in the Torah, if you're busy learning Parashat Truma, and you're reading about the hooks, and about the Yiriyes, and about the Kloim, and about the Vavim La'amudim, and you're thinking that you're reading about a building that was constructed some 3,000 years ago, you're missing the whole point. No. This is about you're learning how to construct your Mishkan. You don't understand what the hooks are in your Mishkan, open up a Sefer Chassidus and find it out. But ultimately, when you're studying these parashas, you're studying about creating your Mishkan. And then later on, when you're studying the parashas of the Kabbanis, you're studying about the Avodah in your Mishkan. And one of the things that, one of the major things that the Friedrich Rebbe focuses on is the idea that the Krashim for the Mishkan, they were made out of Atzei Shittim. And the word Atzei Shittim, cedar wood, but the word in Hebrew, Shittim, is related to the word Shtus. Shtus. And what's incredible is that the walls of the Mishkan were made out of Shtus. Atzei Shittim. We know, Ein Adam Eiver Avera Ela Im Kein Nichnas Bei Ruach Shtus. Right? There's the Shtus within us that causes us to do silly things and stupid things and Averas. How do we make the Mishkan? We make the Mishkan by being mahapech, by transforming the shtus, what the Friedrich Rebbe calls the shtus de lo umaza, the shtus of klipa, to shtus de kedusha. Shtus de kedusha. Friedrich Rebbe brings down the story brought down in the Gemara, Mesachtes Ksubis, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi, that he would go to Chasana. He was a big Rav, and he would meraket atlas, right? He would what?
What do you call that?
Fire.
He juggled Hadassim. And one of his contemporaries, one of the great rabbis, told him, "Kamachsif lon saba. You're an old man. You're a big Talmud Chacham. You're embarrassing us. You're degrading us. You're degrading."
Fool out of yourself.
Yeah.
Shtus.
The shtus. And the Gemara says that after Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi passed away, there was an amuda de nahoira. There was a pillar of fire, which, as the Mefarshim explained, was shaped like a hadas, because he would juggle the hadassim. I don't know, the hadassim are very light. I don't know how you juggle them, but he managed to juggle hadassim. And when his contemporary, who beforehand saw that, he said, "Ahani le shtusei l'saba," which means this was a good shtus. This shtus came to good use for him. And the Friedrich Rebbe points out that there's the idea of shtus de kedusha. Shtus de kedusha means acting irrationally on the side of kedusha. We tend, think about it in life, our foolishness is reserved for averis and doing stupid things. And when it comes to kedusha, we're always so logical and always oiske cheshbent. And should I or should I not? And shtus de kedusha, the Mishkan is created out of shtus de kedusha. The Mishkan is created, and why is that? We can relate to that based on what we're talking about over here. Where does Shtus Kedusha come from? Shtus Kedusha comes from Pnimius Halev. Pnimius Halev. Chitzonius Halev doesn't lead you to Shtus. Chitzonius Halev, when you're doing something, because everything is logical, it started off as logic, so it doesn't lead you to doing illogical things. But when you have Pnimius Halev, then you do things that are illogical. You act in ways that are beyond logic. Right? It's I need to sleep right now. That's what I really need. I'm going to live another 10 minutes. I'm tired, I'm fired. It's illogical, but you know what? That's what I want to do. Okay, we all know the feeling of I need to go to sleep, but you're busy doing something stupid and you don't stop it for another 10 minutes, right? But learning, we never do that because well, if you're too tired to learn, you stop. But if you're too tired to do the other shtus that you're doing, whatever it may be, what? You continue. Why? Because the nefesh habahamis is much better at utilizing shtus. But when we reach the pnimius halev, of the nefesh halikis, then we transcend logic and we're serving the Eibush on a different level altogether. And I want to share with you a few stories that bring out this point. So one story, I heard this from a mashpia in Eretz Yisrael, actually an American guy, and he says that every single time that he flies, I guess he flies a lot back and forth from to the United States. I think he raises money for his yeshiva. So when he's on the plane, he's a Lubavitcher. So what does a Lubavitcher do on the plane?
Looking for people for tefillin.
Pulls out his tefillin, right? Now, I don't know anyone over here, if anyone here has ever done that, gone over to some people and asked them, are you Jewish? And went to put on tefillin. If you haven't, I encourage you to. But if you haven't, you probably can't appreciate how uncomfortable it is to do it. Some people enjoy it, but I think most people who do it, it's not comfortable.
Probably get flat.
You're sitting in your seat on the plane. You're doing whatever you're doing, whether you're learning, whether you're snoozing, whatever it may be. I get up and start going and asking and soliciting.
That's tough to do.
It's tough, right? It's tough.
Today, especially today.
It's a human nature. It's a human nature thing. It's almost like fundraising. Like who likes fundraising? Some people, for most people, it's very difficult. You're bothering people. So he says every single time before he gets up from the seat to go and to ask people, so his Yetzer Hara gets into full gear and gives him like 15 reasons why not to go. First of all, you're very tired. Second of all, probably no Yidden on the plane. Third of all, they're going to probably serve lunch soon. You're going to get in the way of the flight attendants. It's going to be Chil Hashem. And fourth of all, you still didn't do your shir today. You have to learn. Suddenly, there's a million reasons why not to do it. And we all know, right? When you don't want to do something, you come up with so many reasons why not to do it. And after this happened a few times, he said to himself, he thought about it for a little, and he said, you know what? Next time this happens, and this is, he said, every single time this happens is then, whenever this happens, and the Yetzer Hara comes with all the reasons, he tells the Yetzer Hara, he says, you're right. Logically, I thought I shouldn't go do it. But I'm still going to do it. Why? Because I want to. You, Yetzer Hara, how often do you do that? Sometimes you want to do something bad. You want to do an Avera. You want to do something inappropriate. And I give you a million reasons why not to do it. And what's your response to me? You don't respond logically. What do you respond? You say, yeah, but I want to, right? That's what does Yetzer Hara say?
Yeah, that's a Yetzer Hara.
Yetzer Hara, right?
But that's a Yetzer Hara.
So we have to use the same, right? The same ammunition. Shtus Kedusha. You might be right, but you know what? I'm a chassid, and this is what I want to do. The Rebbe tells me to do this, and this is what I want to do. I'm a Yid and Avos Yisrael, and I'm going to go do it. Which is a little tapping into Shtus Kedusha, which is Geula, ultimately Geula. It's being freed from the limitations. If your relationship to Hashem is limited by logic and limited by your understanding and limited by your experiences, as opposed to just doing it above and beyond all that.
How success he was?
He said it seems that he was doing fine. I read recently a story. There was a chassid whose name was Reb Leib Sheinin. He lived in the beginning of the 20th century, and he was a Rav in the city of Dachshitz. And back in the day, even today, being a Rav is not a very lucrative job. There are higher paying jobs out there than being a Rav. Probably you know that. And Rabbanim usually don't have a lot of money, and back then, Rabbanim had even less money. But one thing by him was, every Rosh Hashanah he would go to the Rebbe. His Rebbe was the Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdiker Rebbe, who at that time, we're talking about the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Riga. He lived in Riga. And he would borrow a lot of money.
It's a far trip for him.
When you say a lot, also everything is relative, but he borrowed money which he didn't have to pay for the trip, and the whole year he was busy paying back the debt. But to him, it was a non-negotiable. Rosh Hashanah, you're by the Rebbe. The year 1928 came along. He went to the Rebbe, and he came home. And when he comes home, he gets an invitation in the mail. The Rebbe's daughter is getting married in Kislev, and that was the chasana of our Rebbe, Kislev Tafresh Peitas in 1928. What did he immediately do? He turned around and he borrowed more money. He went back, straight back. Was that a logical thing to do?
No.
Not logical.
Maybe he might not be.
If he was making a cost-benefit analysis and how he'd pay back and how much he'd have to, and what it would cost him, the other things that would deprive him of. This was a bakshupanim mamakim. He was a chassid, and if the Rebbe is marrying off his daughter, I am going to be there. It's not logical. It's absolutely not logical. I am going to be there, whatever the cost is. But there's the beauty in that. The beauty of that we can express our deepest selves in the area of Kedusha. Again, the Rebbe Shabbat is so used to doing that. But turning that around and doing that in the area of Kedusha. I heard there's another chassid whose name was Reb Nachum Lobkovsky, the father of the Rosh Yeshiva in 770 today. The Rosh Yeshiva in 770, his name is Zalman Lobkovsky, his father. And he heard the story that he was once arrested by the KGB. And he was arrested, it was Erev Sukkot. And they took him into I don't know if he's arrested or taken in for interrogation, for questioning. So they brought him into the KGB headquarters, and it comes Sukkot by night. And the only thing that's on his head is a sukkah. Meanwhile, in the course of the interrogations, they put him in a waiting room. In between interrogations, he saw there was an open door, open window. He slipped out. He ran home, a few blocks away. Made kiddush. He quickly ate a kazayis of challah, kazayis, a kaveh, whatever the shear is. Ran back to the station and sat back down and taka.
Never found
This get shot. It didn't bother. But his family went crazy on him. Hey, you're nuts. That could have cost you 20 years in Siberia. They said. And he said, "You're right. You're right.
I couldn't help it.
I wasn't thinking." He said, "I wasn't thinking. The only thing on my head was sukkah, and had I thought it through, Itaka would have probably not gone. But I didn't think it through. That was." And again, this is foreign to us because we're so not used to that mode of thinking that, because again, we are used to that mode of thinking, but not in the area of Kedusha. We're used to doing things and afterwards someone asks, why did you do that? You're like, that was idiotic of me, I didn't think about it, but it wasn't a mitzvah. It was something that we shouldn't have done, right? But the idea, there's that's the Geula, is being able to, the beauty of being able to reach the deepest part of yourself. And just one last story, which I Dafka want to say tonight, because today is a special day. Today, Rosh Chodesh Shvat is, do you tell me, you know what I'm talking about? Is the third yahrzeit of Reb Mendel Morazov, Rabbi Yochanan's grandfather. Passed away 3 years ago today. And as I've mentioned on several occasions, I used to go for praying by him a lot. And I'm going to say a story which might get some of you upset. A story that I heard from him, but it's also actually somewhat involves him to a certain extent. And I'm warning you in advance, open up your minds a little, because it could be an upsetting story, but I'm taking the risk.
Is it about somebody?
Is it about somebody?
Yeah.
As opposed to?
No, I'm just wondering, he's talking about...
Yeah. The Rebbe Rashab lived in the city of Lubavitch, and he ran away from Lubavitch in the end of 1915. After the Yom Tovim in the year Tafresh Ayin Vav.
50.
1915. 1915, during World War I, because of... Yeah, it was during, already, well into World War I. What?
50 was the end.
No.
No, it ended.
It was 1914 to 1918. This is in 1915, he was forced...
Early, 1914.
He was forced to run away from Lubavitch. Now, Reb Mendel Merazov's father was the famous Chassid Reb Chanya Merazov. He was the secretary of the Rebbe Rashab. And when the Rebbe Rashab left, no one at that time, people didn't realize that it was permanent, that he was never coming back. That's actually the end of the era in Lubavitch was in Cheshvan of Tafrei Shayin Vav, I guess November of 1915.
Man, what, because of the war?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of the Chassidim stayed, the yeshiva stayed there. They thought the Rebbe's coming back until eventually it became apparent that the Rebbe wasn't coming back, and that's when everyone left. And I think there were a few hundred Yidden left in Lubavitch when the Nazis arrived and killed all the Yidden there. And that's already 20 years later, 30 years later. So Reb Chanya Merazov stayed behind. He stayed behind in Lubavitch. And he had a wife. And his wife was pregnant. And he also had children. But the children weren't the children of his wife. Meaning Reb Chanya was married once before, and his wife passed away. And he remarried. So he had, I think, 3 children from his first wife. Might be off, at least 3, maybe it's more. And he remarried another woman. And now this woman was, his second wife is pregnant with their first child. This first child, who was Reb Mendel Merazov. Reb Mendel Merazov was born on Tainus Esther of Tafrei Shayin Vav, 1916 Tainus Esther. And during that period of time, suddenly, one day, a fire breaks out in Lubavitch.
Rabbi Morozov told us the story.
Oh, you know the story.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful story.
Fire breaks out, and fires were a big thing then. You see the library of Sfarim, of Chabad Sfarim over here, that stretches around. If not for fires, there would probably be 3 times or 4 times as many Sfarim. The amount of fire, unfortunately, was a relatively frequent occurrence. I don't mean every day, but every few years there's a fire. And when the fires ravaged and they destroyed many ksafim, many manuscripts.
Irreplaceable.
What? Irreplaceable, yeah. A large part of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch we don't have because also burnt. A fire breaks out. Now there were still ksavim that were left in the house of, by the Rebbe Rashab, in the Hoif, in the Chatzar, in the courtyard. The moment that Chanya heard that there's a fire, he abandoned his wife, his pregnant wife, and his children, who weren't even her children. He left the children with his pregnant wife and ran off to save the ksavim from the Rebbe. And to put it mildly, his wife was not very happy with him. And if anyone here is married, you can probably relate to that. You left me, your pregnant wife, with your kids, and while you run off to go to the ksavim? And it was a Shalom Bayis issue. In fact, I heard that the Rebbe in Stern Asara, the wife of the Rebbe Rashab, had to intervene to restore. But Reb Chanya's response was that as soon as I heard there was a fire, I had a brain freeze. And the only thing I was able to think about was the ksavim. And he didn't justify himself. He didn't say it was the right thing. He didn't say I did the right thing. If he had to think about it, he probably would have realized that according to halacha, he was required to take care of his wife and his children, and they're more important than the ksavim. He didn't try to justify his behavior. All he said was, like the other story we said, I wasn't thinking. I wasn't thinking. A real expression of Pnimius Halev. And this is the shtus, the kedusha of which the Mishkan is created. We're not going to create the Mishkan for Hashem by acting logically. In other words, by thinking everything through from beginning to end. We live in a society today where kind of logic is kind of worshipped, at least in the ideal way. But ultimately, The Mishkan for Hashem is made by going above and beyond that, and connecting to that essential connection to Hashem to the point that you do things that are irrational. When do you know, if you were to use, let's say, a metaphor for marriage, when do you know when the relationship is real? When you don't just think everything through logically and did I have to, maybe not. When you do things, when you go to the store and you see the jewelry for your wife and you see the price tag and you're like, I can't afford that, and you say, but I'm buying it anyways. Right? What is that? That shows actually something very, very deep. And is it logical? No, it's not logical. But that shows the depth of the relationship. As long as the relationship is only when it makes sense, and that is what we're looking for with the Eibishter. And that is the Pnimius Alev, which the Alter Rebbe is describing over here. Let's continue on weiter inside.
I know.
Where's Vahainu? Vahainu, yeah, you're right. Vahainu, Lefi, and the reason for this is because this essential point to the heart, transcends and is above the das, the knowledge, which enters the midas. The midas that are born from the Chabad, that are born from the Chachma Bina Das Kanaida. So there is the type of midas that are a product of the Seichel, but the Pnimius Alev, it's beyond that. Rather, it is a ha'ara, a ray, ha'ara, from Lashon Oyer, of Chachma El Yoina. It comes from the Chachma of above, from Hashem, Shalamayla Mahabina Vadas. You know, Bina and Das are comprehension. Chachma is beyond that. Chachma is Lamayla Matam Badas. Uba Melubash, and within the Chachma of the Neshama, within the Chachma, Melubash Veganus, in there is enclosed, and in there is concealed, Oyer Hashem Mamish, the light of Hashem. And that is the Pnimius Alev, is the Chachma, and the Oyer Hashem which is in it. Kameshakosov, as the Pasuk says, Hashem bechachma chulu. Whole pasuk is Hashem bechachma yasad aretz. But for the purposes of our conversation, Hashem bechachma Havaya Yudke Vavke is found in chachma. Within the chachma of our nefesh, there is Hashem Himself. V'hi bechinas nitzot zalakus shebechol nefesh miyisrael, and that is the spark of godliness that's within every single yid. And when a yid accesses this spark, that is the accessing the Pnimius Alev. No, Reuven, how do we access this? Why isn't everyone zeichen to Madrega of Pnimius Alev? La Avodah Shebelei Mu'umka Daliba, the Avodah Shebelei from the depths of the heart. Pnimius Hainu Lefi. This is because Shebechina Zuhi Atzloi Bebechinas Galus V'Shivya. Because Pnimius Alev is mamish within Galus within us. The essential core of who we are and our essential love for Hashem is in Galus. And in order to redeem that, we need to have the Vishaveha. Now we have a better understanding. See in B'mishpat Tipada, Vishaveha is captives will be released. What are the captives? What is the captive? Your Pnimius Alev is the captive. B'Shivya is the Pnimius Nekudas Alev. And in order to remedy that, we need to have tzedakah. How tzedakah leads to that, we'll talk about that in Mirza Hashem as we go along. Actually, next week we're first actually going to go off in a little direction. We're going to talk a little about Bris Milah next week, because actually it's all related. We'll find out how Bris Milah relates to this. But the place we're going to head to and get to eventually is this idea that tzedakah is what Vishaveh b'tzedakah releases it from captivity, and that's why Ein Yisrael Negam Nala b'tzedakah. It's no secret that Lubavitch Chabad is very much connected to Mashiach. There's a special kach by the Rebbe. There was the special kach about Mashiach and a constant yearning and sturming about Mashiach. And when did it all start? It really started 80 years ago, Yud Shvat. 70 years ago, Yud Shvat 1950, at 1951. when the Rebbe accepted the leadership again on Yud Shvat, which this upcoming Shabbos, not this Shabbos, will be the 70th anniversary of that historic Farbrengen. And by the way, when I say historic Farbrengen, it was only historic in hindsight. At the time, it was nothing. If anything, maybe a blip in a newspaper. Okay, so there was a shtibel in Crown Heights, and one Rebbe passed away, and now there's a new young man who's taking over, becoming the Rebbe. It's not. These things happen often. It's not the biggest story. But in hindsight, it was a Farbrengen that changed the face of Yiddishkeit, and the face of Klal Yisrael, and the direction of Klal Yisrael in terms of where it was going. And the Rebbe there laid out his agenda. And the Rebbe standing and talking to his group of 300, 400 Chassidim, the small crowd that was there, the Rebbe tells them, guys, we're bringing Mashiach. Talk about an audacious mission statement. He didn't say we're rebuilding Lubavitch. He didn't say we're going to have a big shul. We're bringing Mashiach. That's our job. We're bringing Mashiach. But you put it in the language of their Hashvi. Maybe we'll talk about it a little next week. And from that point on, that was the Rebbe's koch, and every single thing was bringing Mashiach, and everything towards that was to bring Mashiach. And just, it's difficult to relay this, but if you listen to the Rebbe Sichos and the way the Rebbe spoke about Mashiach, the passion and the desire and the excitement, and you see Pasha Yid whose whole life was Kol Yimei Chayecha Lahavi L'Meisa Mashiach. And this L'Cheira explains one of the interesting features about the Rebbe is just how prominently tzedakah played in everything the Rebbe did. And l'chayra, it's directly connected to this idea which we're talking about over here, tziyin v'mishpat tipada v'shaveh b'tzedakah, and ein yisrael negal nala b'tshuva. One of the things of the Rebbe, a signature of the Rebbe, was giving out dollars every Sunday, which is unheard of. Where is another gadol b'Yisrael that's busy giving out money to everyone? That klal works the other way around, right? And here's the Rebbe giving out dollars, giving out money to everyone. Now, just to be clear, there is this idea, always historically, the Gemara says that Hanoitel Pruta Me'iyev Mizbarach. There's a skula to have a coin from a tzaddik. The Rebbe sometimes would do that. The Rebbe would, if someone would send some money, and the Rebbe would say, this is from a kupa, this is from one of the funds of my father-in-law, the Friedrich Rebbe, so therefore, by you having this, it'll be a bracha. So that's something which is done. Even today, I believe there's certain citizens where the Rebbe will give out $1 or some coins as a skula. The Rebbe wasn't giving out dollars as skulas. People kept them because that was their choice. But the Rebbe was very clear. He's giving out $1, they should give it to tzedakah. And every time people would come by the Rebbe would give them money for tzedakah. If the Rebbe is going to meet another Yid, he's giving him $1 to give to tzedakah. When the Rebbe would walk to Minyan, to Daven, you'd have a bag of nickels, and they would be giving out nickels to all the kids, and sometimes the adults to give to tzedakah. After every weekday Farbrengen, the Rebbe would give out $1 to everyone to give to tzedakah. We know that it was creative, and there are things that the Rebbe did that there are no parallels to it. It's a very rare, or I don't know if there is, you find a gadol like that with totally innovative new ideas. Most gedolim, they follow, what did my Rebbe do, what did my teacher do, and what's the Messiah? And the Rebbe, this is one of the things, where do you find this? That Pasha, at every single occasion, busy giving up money to give people to give to tzedakah. And that was a very big emphasis. And then the Rebbe told the Chassidim, I want everyone to have, not only you should have a tzedakah pushka in your house, you have to have a tzedakah pushka affixed in your house. The Rebbe wants everyone to have a tzedakah pushka screwed or nailed into the wall. You have one in your house?
5 of them.
Not tzedakah pushka in your house. Affixed in the house. Yeah. Okay, so tonight you'll go home, or tomorrow, you take a screwdriver or a hammer. If you can't do it, your wife can. That's my house. My wife does all these things. And you... Why? The Rebbe says, I don't want your house to be a place within which there is a tzedakah pushka. I want your house to be a tzedakah pushka. When you affix it to the wall, then it's not only something in the house, it's actually part of my house is a house of tzedakah. And this is something, again, this emphasis on tzedakah by the Rebbe is something which is unusual. But then when we sit over here and we learn this idea of Ein Yisrael Negal Nala B'Tzedakah, and you put 2 and 2 together and realize, again, the Rebbe's mission statement is Mashiach, so it's not very surprising, this tremendous koch in tzedakah. And the Rebbe is constantly encouraging to give tzedakah. So bottom line is, we still have to get to the nakuda of this Peirik, which is, What is exactly, how does it work? How does the V'shaveh b'tzedakah, how do we get the Geula, again, the Geula Klalis, and also the Geula Pratis that we're talking about today, which is the Geula of the Primis Halev. What's the relationship to tzedakah? We didn't yet get to there. But the one takeaway we could definitely take from here is the idea of kochen zich in tzedakah, and giving tzedakah more than we think we can give, and more often than we think we can give. It's not only about quantity of money, but it's also about on a constant basis and consistent basis, and giving tzedakah, and realizing that it brings about the Geula Klalis, and also it brings us our own personal Geula. Shabbos, everyone.